Today, my guest is the Honorable Senator Cesar Blanco, who represents District 29 here in El Paso County and far West Texas. Welcome, Senator Blanco.
Great to be with you, Dr. Peregrino.
I know before you were in the House and now you're in the Senate. Could you tell us a little bit about how it's different so the students can learn about and our audience can learn about the differences between serving in the different branches?
Absolutely. It is quite different. As you all know, I served in the Texas House of Representatives in District 76 for 6 years before running for the state Senate. And state Senate obviously is a 4-year term, but I've been a state senator now for 2 years. And, you know, at the very basic, there are 150 members in the House of Representatives as opposed to the Senate, where we have 31 members. And senators serve for 4-year terms, and they represent close to about 1 million constituents each. Whereas House members serve a 2-year term, and they represent a smaller number of constituents, which is about 160,000 people. So for this reason, the state constitution requires that all bills that increase taxes or bills that raise revenue for the use by the state, all of those bills originate in the House of Representatives, which is very different in the Senate. So, you know, at its core, the responsibilities and the setup is quite different, but so do our resources. You know, the Senate has larger budgets since we serve a larger group of constituents. We have more resources, but you know, since moving to the Senate, I've been able to bring on more staff than I had in the House, so we can effectively and efficiently serve our district. I've got a district office located here in East Central El Paso, but since my district covers all of West Texas, meaning we cover El Paso County, Hudspeth County, Culberson County, Jeff Davis County, Reeves, Pecos, Brewster, and Presidio County, 8 counties. What we've done is we implement a monthly mobile office hours, which my staff drives out to different counties within the Senate district to meet and listen to constituents who have concerns in those areas. That way we're more accessible. So it's different. I do enjoy the Senate. The Senate, you work with less senators. You don't have to work with 150 House members. So it's a little bit easier to manage. We also have more committee assignments. In the House, typically you serve on 2 committees, maybe 3. But in the Senate, I serve on several. I serve on the Senate Transportation Committee, the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee, and Board of Security. I serve on the Higher Education Committee, and then I serve on the Health and Human Services Committee. So as you can imagine, the workload in the Senate is a lot more because of the size of the district, because the size of the constituency they represent, the number of committees that you serve on, and it's less people in the Senate, so we serve on a lot more committees. So those are pretty much the differences, but it's been fun so far to do that.
And I actually did notice that you brought some of the other senators here to El Paso to talk about transportation issues just in the past week. Could you discuss a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, regardless of the parties, you know, I make it a point to try to build strong relationships with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Why? Because they're in the majority, and it's important to have those relationships. So I invite my chairman and chairwomen to El Paso, and we recently had, as you had mentioned, Senate Transportation Chairman Robert Nichols here in El Paso. We met with a lot of community stakeholders. We did a windshield tour with our local TxDOT district engineer. We met with the Chamber of Commerce. We met with a lot of rural communities such as Clint and San Elizario and Socorro and Horizon City and others. And then we invited folks from some of the outer counties that represent Culberson County and Hudspeth County as well to do roundtables so that they can listen to our needs, listen to our concerns. And I think it's important because we're bringing our voice as we invite these individuals to our community. They're hearing some of the challenges. And it makes it easier for me when we're in session and we're trying to get a project funded. I can remind those who came to visit us, hey, remember that project? And remember our community was talking about how important this type of infrastructure is. I need your help with this. And then they're able to be helpful with us. So I think it's important to bring community leaders or statewide leaders to our communities in order to help advocate for our fair share of resources.
Could you tell me some of the accomplishments for the session we had last year in 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we last session, as I mentioned, was my first session in the Senate. We hit the ground running. We filed a total of 103 bills, and I joint authored and co-authored 94 additional bills. I would say some of the most notable bills that we did pass was Senate Bill 168, which is an active shooter bill, which will ensure that active shooter exercises are safely conducted and that they do no harm to the mental health and the well-being of our students and our teachers. We passed that bill in order to ensure that these trainings are done. It's unfortunately that we have to do these trainings nowadays, but I want to make sure that if we're going to do those trainings, that they're smart and that they're not harmful, they're more helpful. We also passed Senate Bill 165, which allows for higher education students to be exempt from being penalized for courses that they had to drop during a disaster that resulted in a bar or limit on a in-person course attendance. So we saw that happen throughout the pandemic. So we want to make sure that we were taking care of our students. Some of the most notable bills I filed last session that did not pass, but I'm going to file them up again, is Senate Bill 167, which allows higher education to only raise the tuition at the rate of inflation as determined by the prior year's consumer price index, because we're seeing tuition skyrocketing. It's becoming more difficult for students to achieve an educational goal. So I want to make sure we're doing that bills. We also filed legislation to establish a law school here in El Paso. It's something that we've been discussing. But we're also, very proud of a lot of the other legislation that I passed. I passed the Lie and Try bill. It's a rare gun safety measure that passed this last legislature. It was based on the recommendation from the Texas Safety Action Report that was published in response to the shooting we had here in El Paso. And this bill creates a state criminal offense for lying on a background check in order to purchase illegally a firearm. So that bill passed. The governor signed it, and as you can see, it was a bipartisan bill. We also passed the Vanessa Guillen Act. I worked with the Vanessa Guillen family in order to name this bill because her disappearance and her death, I think, highlighted the pervasiveness of sexual assault in the military. And what this bill did was it creates a sexual assault response coordinator that is not within the chain of command in the military, but outside the chain of command. And they would provide military members in Texas military department who report accusations of sexual violence. It provides them with help and resources. So this is a bill that I hope will put a stop to the culture of harassment or assault and retaliation within our state military forces. So those were a number of things that we did this last session. We passed a very important broadband bill that's going to help our inner cities as well as our rural communities have broadband. I think we saw in the pandemic that everybody needs good quality internet connection and fast internet connection. Whether you're doing business or you're visiting your doctor through telemedicine, or many parents became instant teachers, right? With their kids going to school on their laptops or on their tablets. So we need to make sure that we pass this broadband bill that's going to create that type of infrastructure throughout our state. It's something that I'm very proud of that we worked on and this last legislative session.
So for 2023, the upcoming legislative session, what are your top 3 priorities?
At the beginning of the month, we heard from Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He held a press conference to unveil his 21 legislative priorities for next session. And among those were state investment in mental health facilities, which is very important for El Paso. increasing school security as a result of the Uvalde shooting that I think is very important here for our community. Tightening the state's election laws is something that he had mentioned. He also talked about border security and law enforcement. Also, most importantly, addressing ballooning property taxes for homeowners. Mm-hmm. So it's safe to say that those are the priorities that are going to be at the forefront of next legislative session. Now, the top three legislative priorities for this session, for me, are going to be number one, making sure that we're keeping our community safe by passing effective and common sense gun legislation. Number two, we're going to be working on bills that give Texas families economic security. We're going to be looking at a variety of bills that help do that. And then finally, we're going to file bills that ensure that we have a healthy and skilled workforce. Earlier this year, we lost 19 children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary, and it was really sad. And then 3 years ago, we lost 23 lives in El Paso who were cut short due to gun violence. So, in an average year, think about this, more than 3,600 people, that's 3,600 people die by guns in Texas. And if we're going to be serious about taking a comprehensive and holistic approach to addressing school shootings and gun violence, we have to take a look at access to guns, and we have to pass common sense measures. And we're doing everything but addressing access to guns. We've invested in mental health. We've hardened our schools. But unfortunately, these tragedies keep happening. And a long time has passed since we got serious about some of these common sense gun safety solutions. So we've got to do more in order to protect our kids and our communities from gun violence. And I talked a little bit about the bill that I filed. It passed. The governor signed that. So we want to make sure that we're working, doing everything we can to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. And, we want to make sure that when Texas, going to the second priority, Texas offers the SNAP program as a supplemental nutrition assistance program in order to fight hunger. But unfortunately, many families have been denied much needed aid in the state of Texas because they own a vehicle valued over a certain amount, and it disqualifies them from receiving food assistance. And so this was established in 2001, the SNAP vehicle asset test cap. And we want to make sure that owning a vehicle worth more than those limits, that it disqualifies hungry Texans from family SNAP benefit, that they shouldn't be disqualified, right? So even if you have lost your job, and have no way to pay for food, the state shouldn't disqualify you for using your vehicle to try to go find a job. So, these limits are outdated and they've lost touch with reality, especially with today's market. I think we need to make these adjustments. So I've filed a bill to make sure that we adjust the outdated vehicle asset limits to reflect today's inflation rate. The other issue that I'm sure you hear a lot about as well is the property taxes and how the appraisals contribute significantly to the economic instability in Texas. Many Texans live paycheck to paycheck and they struggle to save for emergencies, or they struggle to save for retirement. And a chunk of this strife comes from local taxpayers contributing to more than 60% of funding for public services and including our public schools. So we need to balance the share between the state and taxpayers, which would then give people significant property tax relief. This goes hand in hand with economic security. We need to focus on that. And then finally, we need to ensure that we're focusing on a healthy and educated workforce. I think when you look at making investments in your greatest asset, and from my perspective, our greatest asset is our people. We need to make sure that we expand Medicaid to ensure that we provide critical health coverage to millions of Texans. We can do that. We also need to make sure that we're supporting our rural communities, that they have access to better health care close to home. A lot of the folks that I work with in my rural communities have to drive all the way to El Paso or to Midland to get their health care. So if we don't address these issues, it's going to impact a lot of our areas negatively. So we need to focus on education. We need to focus on healthcare. We also need to make sure that we're focusing on educating our workforce, because I think those items are really a key to the future of Texas.
You bring up really good points and really good issues, but do you think, given the composition of the fact that the Democrats are in the minority, I know they passed constitutional carry, so now they don't even need a class, or as long as they, I guess, pass a background check, they can buy a weapon without getting a license. And I think the governor also said that there was a court case that said that you couldn't even limit handgun purchases to 21-year-olds. So, what kind of bill would you want to pass given those constraints?
We need to make sure, as it relates to access to guns in our community, that we're keeping guns out of the reach of bad individuals. We also need to take a comprehensive approach. When you look at what's happening in our schools, when you look at what's happening in the places that people shop, it's really difficult. It's sad that we live in this fear. So we need to take a comprehensive approach. I think it requires that we do a lot more than what we've done. And I think we need a lot of political courage for folks to stand up against the gun lobby. I think the gun lobby has a very strong control of a lot of politicians, and not only in the state of Texas, but also in the state legislature. So we need to do things like making sure that we're implementing background checks. We need to make sure that we're eliminating high capacity magazines. I think we need to set an age requirement for the purchase of assault weapons. These are all measures. We need to make sure that we're implementing red flag laws. The bottom line is that we have to have that political courage to do that. So we'll be working with our colleagues across the aisle to make sure that we give this information, that they hear from communities like Santa Fe, El Paso, Uvalde, Odessa, and all of these cities that have had a number of mass shootings throughout the state, to hear our voices.
And thank you for having the courage to do that and to discuss the fact that there is a very strong gun lobby in our state. The other thing that I thought of, in Texas, basically abortions are now illegal because of the Dobbs Supreme Court decision. Are you going to try to do something more with emergency Medicaid for pregnant women?
Well, there's a number of things that we can do. Unfortunately, this state passed some more draconian measures on women's access to women's health. And I think it's sad. I think these are decisions that should be between a woman and her physician, not by politicians in Washington and not by politicians in the state. This is a very personal matter. And I think women have earned the right to make their own healthcare decisions about how they move forward with their pregnancies. And it's unfortunate that the state of Texas has gone to this level. We've heard recently some Republicans say that in instances of rape, in instances of incest, that this law should not apply. And I'm encouraged to hear a little bit about that, but it still doesn't undo a lot of the harm that will happen. You're going to see women leaving the state of Texas, whether it's to New Mexico or to Oklahoma or to Louisiana or even to Juarez to receive their health care. And it's unfortunate that our state is driving women away because of these laws. Laws that, many say are religiously based, but ultimately a woman has her own rights and decisions. And I think the state is unfortunately taking away a lot of those rights that women have. So we're going to be looking at measures to see if we can reinstate some of the things that existed previously before this law was passed. But it's not going to be easy. Elections have consequences. And I encourage, because we Democrats are in the minority in this, and every single Republican voted for that bill. I encourage people from El Paso that have family that live in other cities that may be represented by a Republican to talk to them about these situations that occur. Everyone has family that is dealing with either a dangerous pregnancy that could be detrimental to a woman's life. A lot of people hear these stories, so we need to be more flexible in our approach, because women have rights and they should have the right to make their own healthcare decisions.
I know that we also talked about property taxes. I had my students watch the Greg Abbott Beto debate, and the Texas Tribune did an analysis, and they found that low income and middle income Texans actually pay more taxes than people in California, which I was surprised to hear.
A simple solution to this issue is the state paying its fair share into state education. That means our public education system. We've seen a decrease in that investment over the last several decades of the state, from my perspective, not doing its constitutional duty of disseminating knowledge to our youth in the state of Texas. But I think real property tax reform includes the state making its contribution, meaning paying a greater share of our public schools. And until we see that, I think, unfortunately, people are still going to continue to see their property taxes. Here in El Paso, the homeowner foots the 60% of the tax base, whereas in other communities, you see commercial or businesses, it's the reverse here in El Paso. So unfortunately, in El Paso, the homeowner foots the bill. And we've got to change that, because, if you're a senior citizen on a fixed income and you get a huge property tax bill, you're going to have to make tough decisions, whether it's paying for your prescription drugs or not having internet at your house anymore. Those type of things put stressors on these families. So I'm encouraging other legislators to go in with an open mind to pay for the state to pay its fair share in public education.
Senator Blanco, I know this year going into the next session, you have $27 billion more than you did the previous session. What would you like to see that spent on?
Yeah, $27 billion is a lot of money. And I think it's kind of like a golden egg. It's a golden egg to be able to address a lot of the issues that we've lacked funding for now, for several years. So I think it's a very big opportunity to do something bold in our state. I think it's an opportunity for us to make long-term investments to address some of our most pressing issues, like property taxes that we were just talking about. I think folks on both sides of the aisle have expressed support for using the state's budget surplus to deliver property tax relief. But there's been some split on how far to go and how to pay for it. But I think we have an opportunity. I think we should use some of these funds, by increasing the state's share of public education funding, like I'd mentioned, by expanding Medicaid. Public education funding is a shared commitment between local property taxpayers and the state of Texas. But as the property values in Texas begin to, rise, I'd mentioned before, the state share declined and local property taxpayers began carrying the burden, unfortunately. Currently, local property tax owners, foot a greater share of the bill. And when you look at rural communities that I represent, like Marfa and Alpine and Fort Davis, with smaller tax bases, rural districts are disproportionately impacted. So by redistributing these funds back to our schools and restoring the state's share to what I would like to see over 50%, I think our schools will not only have the resources for our kids to succeed, but property taxes would feel a serious relief in their wallet. I mean, the taxpayers would feel that relief in their wallet. When you look at Medicaid expansion, it would not only cover over 1.7 million people that are uninsured in Texas, but it's going to improve things like hospital performance. It's going to curtail the rate of some of these rural hospital closures that we've seen in our districts. It's also going to bring over $15 billion to this state, and that's going to do a lot of things. It's going to
We lost you briefly with our internet connection. And so we were discussing the Medicaid expansion. As you know, we're number one in uninsured people in the state of Texas, number one in the country.
Right.
And so what would be the benefits of Medicaid expansion?
Well, one of the benefits earlier about broadband, I think this is a good example of how we got dropped off. We need better broadband in our community, and we should have it here pretty soon since the state invested in it. But back to Medicaid expansion, yes, Medicaid expansion would not only cover 1.7 million uninsured Texans, but it'll improve hospital performance, and it's going to also curtail the rate of rural hospital closures. That's a big deal in my rural parts of some of my counties. That we have rural hospitals. They're concerned that those hospitals are going to close. And they're already limited in what they can do, but that's a big risk. But Medicaid expansion is also going to bring over $15 billion to the state. That's going to help create jobs. It's going to help small businesses that can't afford insurance premiums. It's going to reduce property taxes. It's going to help a lot of the safety net hospitals that provide indigent care, like UMC. So those are really the two items that I think that the $27 billion surplus that we have should be focusing on: education, funding for our schools, and then expanding health insurance coverage, and relieving the financial burden of property taxes. Those three items seem like common sense solutions. I think they're long-term solutions to me, and I think those are things that are going to be helping our state in the long term.
Senator Blanco, we're kind of coming to the end of our session. Is there anything that you want to add?
That we've seen a lot of partisanship in our legislative bodies. We see it at the federal level. We see it at the state level. And it's important that we work together to find solutions for our communities. And I always try to build relationships regardless of party with individuals, because El Paso and West Texas need solutions, and we need someone who's going to work hard and hand in hand to bring relief, to make sure that we're doing our job to help people in our communities. And that's why I'm bringing folks here to El Paso, so they can see firsthand our needs, so they can see firsthand the work that we're doing here to improve the lives of our constituents here in the Borderplex region. So, El Pasoans and West Texans have my commitment to do the work, to do less fighting and bickering with one another, and making sure that we're bringing results to our communities, because you all send us to get to work, to making sure that we're fighting for our fair share of resources. And I do that by building strong relationships with everyone that I serve with in the Texas legislature.
Thank you, Senator Blanco. It's been an honor, and we're very privileged to have you representing us in the Senate. And thank you for everything that you do. I mentioned to the students how not well compensated our state senators are, that you only make $7,200 a year. And that usually shocks them because, you're doing a public service by representing us at the state level. And I thank you for your time, and thank you. Good luck in 2023.
Well, Dr. Peregrino, it's always an honor. It's an honor to serve this community. This is a very unique opportunity to make a positive difference, and really appreciate you having me, and I'll come back as long as you invite me.
Thank you, sir.